Welcome, bonjour. Thank you for being here. My name is Jackie Gahagan. I'm the Associate Vice President of Research here at MSVU. And I'm really pleased to welcome you to our Black and Indigenous Speaker Series for May the 8th, 2025. We are really gifted to have Theresa Meuse with us. I'm not going to go into more of an introduction because we have that forthcoming, but I did want to provide a land acknowledgement, which is to suggest that this is important to me as AVPR because what we're trying to do is look at how research at the Mount can be done in a good way, which is to say how we can embrace, not just in theory, but in practice, how we do research with all communities and particularly with respect to Indigenous communities. So part of the rationale for the Black and Indigenous Speaker Series is so that we can all learn new things and new ways of knowing the world around us. And one of the commitments our office has made is to the OCAP, funding of OCAP training. So if people are not familiar with OCAP, you should check it out. We are offering up to 20 OCAP bursaries for people to learn how to do research with Indigenous communities. So you don't have to be an Indigenous scholar or somebody who is 100% doing research with Indigenous communities. But if you would like to learn more about how to do research in a good way with Indigenous communities, I would urge you to consider taking the OCAP training. So I would like to acknowledge that MSVU is located in Mi'kmaq, which is the ancestral and unceded territory of the Mi'kmaq people. This territory is covered by the treaties of peace and friendship, first signed with the British Crown in 1725. What's really important to note here is that the treaties did not deal with the surrender of lands or resources, but in fact recognized Mi'kmaq and Maliseet title and established rules for what would become ongoing relationships between nations. Mount St. Vincent University recognizes with great respect the long history of the cultural traditions of the Mi'kmaq peoples, and we're committed to maintaining and building relationships on principles of mutual trust, respect, reciprocity, and collaboration in the spirit of reconciliation. I'd also like to acknowledge that we are here in Nova Scotia, which is also home to people of African descent who have been here in this province for over 400 years. And we honor and offer gratitude to the ancestors of African descent and those who came to this land before us. And just for those of you who are not familiar with the Black and Indigenous Speaker Series, you can find more information on the Research Office website, MSVU Black and Indigenous Speaker Series, where we have posted the talks from our previous speakers. So this is really meant to be a teaching and learning opportunity. So please do figure out ways to innovatively include those materials in teaching and learning opportunities with your students or with your communities or with your friends. And the purpose is really to bring to focus the work of Black and Indigenous scholars across Turtle Island. And we do this through presentations and conversations, such as the one we'll have today, to invite Black and Indigenous scholars to share their worldview. So I'm going to stop there and pass it over to you, Simon. Thanks.
Thank you, Jackie. I would now like to introduce Emma McCarthy, who will be introducing Theresa Meuse today. Emma often volunteers within the community in both Girl Guides and 2 different units, as well as recently the IWK with the Child Life Playgrounds. She has a BA in Child and Youth Studies and a minor in Psychology and here at the Mount, and will be graduating in the upcoming convocation. So congratulations.
So I'm here to introduce Theresa for you guys today. Theresa was raised in Ilsakuk, Bear River First Nation, a community where she actually served 2 years as chief. As well as this, she has worked with several Indigenous organizations such as the Confederacy of Mainland Mi'kmaq, the Atlantic Policy Congress, and the Mi'kmaq First Nation Center. Along with this, Theresa spent many years working as an Indigenous educator and advisor and continues as a knowledge sharer today. Theresa, on top of all of this, operates her own business online called Mi'kmaq Craft Supplies. Mi'kmaqi Craft Supplies is an author of 4 published children's books and has a BA from Dalhousie, actually. I'll hand it over to you, Theresa.
Thank you very much, Emma. Just looking at time, I said I'm going to be talking very fast because I've got to give you 500 years of history in 45 minutes. So I'd say, what's that license plate? Sit down, buckle up, all that stuff. Yeah, it's going to be a merry ride. Okay, so I'd like to say thank you for being here and of taking up your time. And
It is, it's going to be, normally this presentation, I usually don't do in under 2 hours. So I'm not going to, I can't guarantee you we're going to get through it all, but we'll get through as much as we can. In our culture, we always say whatever we're talking about, that's what we're supposed to be talking about or discussing. We don't worry about the actual agenda. So we'll see how far we get through this session. All right, so I'd like to start off by saying Dalhousie, which of course many of you know that that's our Mi'kmaq word to say welcome. And if you have heard me before doing Dalhousie, I repeat a lot of what this means because I think we still need to educate and remind people that Dalhousie in our culture means more than just welcome. We're taught by our ancestors and our elders that Dalhousie means come in. We're going to offer you the best we have to offer, whatever that may be, and it may not necessarily be materialistic things. If you go to a lot of the elders in the community and just about anybody, if they don't offer you a cup of tea or something to eat, there's something wrong. So just to let you know that. So in the days of our ancestors, the stories that's told to us is that when our ancestors lived in the wigwams and you had the fire in the middle, and then when company came or visitors came, they would guide them to the other side of the fire. And because that's where it's going to be the warmest. And so that was giving the best that they had to offer. And so I thought that was such a simplistic explanation, but yet has such great meaning. So when we say Dalhousie, that's what we mean. It's not just, welcome. It means it means an action, because that's one thing about our Mi'kmaq language. It's action-based, it's verb-based. And so if you can picture that, being welcomed, Dalhousie, come on in, take your rightful place. We also like to acknowledge that our ancestors have been here for over 13,000 years. I'm hearing now that they're finding artifacts that's now dating it back to 15,000 years. So I think it's probably still up for debate out there, but for now, we know that the 13,000 is for sure. We always like to acknowledge our elders of the past because it was their strength that's allowed us to be here today. And not just us as Mi'kmaq people, but all of us to be here and be right here in this particular spot. And they always welcome newcomers, and then we do the same thing. When you go into community, usually everybody is welcomed, and you will see that a lot. We also have a word called insinogama, which some people will explain it that it means all my relations. Others will say we're all connected, and that's what it means. Insinogama. It means we're all connected, not just as humans, but with the animal, the plant, anything that creation is providing us, Mother Earth is providing us. We're all connected, and it's part of life that the elders like to teach us as we're going through our journeys. How does that connection all come to be? And I think the new topic of two-eyed seeing is a great place to begin learning how we are all connected. And this just shows you the little pieces of area that we do refer to as Mi'kmaq. Now, I do want to point out one thing about this map. I was in a grade 3 class, a non-Indigenous classroom one day doing a presentation. And one of the little young fellas, he put his hand up and he goes, Miss Meuse, because this map was actually on a great big map behind me where I was standing up front. He said, did you ever notice there's a woman in that map? And I looked around and I went, no. I said, where do you see a woman? And he pointed a woman out to me. Can anybody see the woman? Huh? Can you see it? New Brunswick, yeah, it's the silhouette, so they're like this. So New Brunswick's the head, and it looks like they're holding a feather or sweetgrass, or they're praying. And then if that wasn't there, it looks like Nova Scotia is like their knees or their legs, right? And when he said that, I cannot look at this map without seeing that now. Even if I look at the weather on TV and Buddy's got all the sunshine, I still see that woman in the background. So I think, and I love that, because what we're seeing in today's society or within our communities is we're seeing the women taking back some of the roles that we had lost over the years. And so I think that's just so appropriate that it's the woman that's guiding us. So I wanted to bring that to your attention so that you will now see it every time. Okay, so this was actually one of my most recent learnings, and it was to do with the Inuit. When we use the term Indigenous, we look at 3 groups. So we're talking about 3 groups, and this is within Canada. It's the First Nation, Inuit, and Métis. Now, of course, we know other countries also uses the term Indigenous, but for in Canada, this is what we refer to. It used to be Aboriginal, and yeah, and of course, Indigenous is the newest one. Titles are another workshop in itself. I might get into that in this piece, I'm not sure, but government is the one that tells us the titles. We just get used to one title and then we're given another one. I don't know the rhyme and reason behind it, but we have had many titles over the years. We've probably had 5 in just my time that I can think of. So what I'd like to start off with, though, is the Inuit, bringing attention to the Inuit. I only thought there was ever one group of Inuit and there was only one flag, and it was that Nunavut flag, this one right here. And luckily, my coworker, Frances, who's Inuit, works at the Friendship Center. She said, you know, there's more flags than one. And I'm like, really? And so she explained to me that there's actually 4, and they represent the 4 regions of the Inuit communities, and they're based on land claims. So each one of those is their own specific group that deals with their own specific land claims. And then we come down to the First Nation. And I can't really say we have a flag that represents, quote, the national First Nation, but I've picked these because I like these and I use them whenever I can. I really love this one, and I've used this just about anywhere when I'm looking at the First Nation of Canada. I just feel this kind of tells a big story. And then there's this newest one that came out, and I kind of like that one too, so I use that. But so we don't literally have one, so maybe somebody can make one. For Mi'kmaq, we do have one. I don't have it up, but we do have one for Mi'kmaq, and of course we all know it's the Grand Council flag that's used for Mi'kmaq. Those 2 symbols represent the Métis of Canada, and apparently what I've been told is the color is representative of the actual history line of that particular group. Okay, now we're going to just move on to a little bit of stats. These are kind of out of date stats, like I think they come from about 2016. I'm not sure there's been any updated ones. So I know the numbers have changed a lot though. So we can look at these with a little grain of salt because we know if they're gone up. So what we have here is actually all the Maliseet and Mi'kmaq communities of Nova Scotia, Prince Edward Island, and even in Quebec, we've identified them. And so they're all represented with their number and their color. And of course, I'm from Bear River, which is way down here, and managed to work my way up here. And I might say, look, you can see that woman too, right? Even in this side, might be that woman. So this just gives you an idea. There are 13 Mi'kmaq communities that live on reserve lands in Nova Scotia. Now the difference between, and I don't know if that's one of my next slides, I don't want to get too caught up with details like that, but the difference between a band and a reserve is the reserve refers to the land base. In the United States, they call them reservations. In Canada, we call them reserves. So it's the land base that the federal government has issued, and I don't know if that's the proper word, but has set aside these lands for the First Nation people to be using. The band is actually the name of the First Nation group that's using that reserve land. So if we want to just look at Bear River as an example, number 9, Bear River actually has 3 reserve lands. There's the main one is in Bear River, so that's where the main population on reserve lives. There's a smaller parcel of land of about 50 acres in Lakeele, which is just off Annapolis Royal, and there's, I think, 3 families live there, and that's made up of about 30 or 40 acres. And then in Bear River, the main reserve actually is made up of about 1,000 acres. Then there's Greywood, which is again on the other side of Annapolis Royal, and it's undeveloped land. Nobody lives there. And that's made up of about 30 or 40 acres of land too. Don't ask me how these lands comes about, because I have no idea how you get Bear River over here and Lakeele over. I know it's where a lot of our Mi'kmaq people would have lived, but I still don't know how we did that as being the reserve. So that's what we're looking at right across Canada. We have a number of bands. So up in the corner, you can see we have 13 bands, and they utilize over 40 reserve lands. Okay, so a lot of the community is more than one reserve. Same for New Brunswick, same for Prince Edward Island, Newfoundland, and then Atlantic provinces is showing, and there's populations for approximately in Canada, there for on and off, I do believe, reserve. And then the populations of the First Nation, the Inuit, and the Métis. And again, like I said, these are back in 2016, so they're a little outdated, but still there. All right, next. Oh, we are going to get into some titles. Okay, I think this is very important because these titles were placed upon us. These aren't titles that we created. These are titles we just learned to live with. And of course, we know way back in the times of the beginning of European colonization, the titles were savage and redskin. And the reason we know that is because when they did research in the archives, back in the council meeting minutes, of way back in the 1600s, those words were used a lot. And I had the privilege of working as a summer student in the archives, looking exactly for that. All I had to do was look for the word savage or Indian or Mi'kmaq or any kind of word, redskin. I printed it off, stapled it together, highlighted the word, gave it to my boss, and they're the ones that did the researching. This would have been like the late Danny Paul and Don Julian. And they did, that's how a lot of this information came about, was through their researching. And so I saw that for myself, that those were actually terms. Then I grew up being known as an Indian. That was just part of it. Although what always troubled me was I'd compare myself to John Wayne's country and western shows. And I'm like, geez, I'm glad I'm not like them Indians. Or worse, we played cowboys and Indians as kids, and none of us wanted to be the Indians because you always got killed off, right? So we always wanted to be the cowboy. So it's funny how society had brainwashed us even. And we get called all kinds of names, of course, that's a given. And then it went to Native. And Native became a very popular, and it kind of was, not so harsh sounding, and it was kind of nice. And I remember being so proud one day. I saw on the front page of the Chronicle Herald, and this was many years ago when we were using the term Native, and the big headline said, "Native receives this great big honor," and it said somebody's name, Native so-and-so. And I went, oh my gosh, look, for the first time, they're going to say something good about our people. So I started to read the article, and then come to find out they were talking about a native Haligonian. It wasn't even about us. It was about the good deeds that this person did. I was like, shoot. I said, I thought for sure we were going to do something good. So you can see how these words were mixing up people as well. And then, of course, it went to Indigenous. So when I was in university, we were Indigenous then. So we were using that title. Then somewhere along the line, after the 90s, they come out with Aboriginal. And I thought, well, what's wrong with Indigenous, right? That was working. And I don't know why. Like I said, I don't know why. So we started using it Aboriginal. And
that Aboriginal means not original, which is the polar opposite of what we are.
Yes, the terminology when you start breaking it down. Yeah. And so this lasted quite a few years. And I remember when I was working as a student support worker in the high school, this was the word. And so all my forms, all my papers had Aboriginal. And then throughout the couple of years, they said, okay, no, we're going back to Indigenous. So I had to turn around and take all my paperwork and make it Indigenous. But totally understand, like Jordan's right, this word wasn't popular. The other thing that was happening too, there was confusion with these. So like Indian, for example, we now have people that are deemed as East Indian. So there was that challenge. And people being Native, well, you could just be Native of that community, not necessarily Indigenous. And an Aboriginal, like Jordan said, came with that negative tone. So now we're back to Indigenous again, and that's what the three communities or the three names represent. And in Mi'kmaq, we like to use the word Ilnuk or Ilnu. Ilnu kind of refers to like, I'm an Ilnu, but we're Ilnuk, right? Ilnuk community. And it doesn't necessarily mean Mi'kmaq. It's just the Mi'kmaq word to mean the people. So it could be any people, but when we say that, we kind of hear, if we say Ilnu, it kind of means, oh, are you Indigenous or are you from the First Nation? Okay. Over here is a little bit of identity. And this is the most common thing that we see in our culture. It doesn't mean that it's the end all to end all, because this doesn't necessarily tell you at 100% your identity. Just because you don't have a status card doesn't mean you still don't have Indigenous ancestry. But this is one of the things that this is government led. Okay, this is government led. And so federal government recognizes who is from the First Nation and who is not. And that's based on whether you can, what kind of information you can prove it on. Now, from what I understand in the States, they do it by blood quantum. Here, we do it by family line or whatever they use. I'm not quite sure what the government uses, but if you can prove it, it's usually paperwork. If you can prove it through paperwork, you're okay. So these are just examples. The top one is actually the old, we call it the old fashioned status card, although it is still around. Some people still are using it. And this is the newer one. And I hear we're going to get another new one, but I don't know when. So the only thing with this one is it allows you to expire. so and you know, we kind of chuckled at that, and I did laugh, you know, I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to expire. But when it does come to identity, that is scary, because we already know that the government can say you are, and then in the next day say you're not. And so I always wonder when I'm up to get mine expired, are they really going to do it?
Have a expiry date.
Yeah, but we were always happy with them because it was our own people signing them off, right? But these ones now, the government does it, and we're not. We can. Yes, I did. I bring mine. I was going to say we can share them around. Huh?
With the states and it being blood samples, is that ethical for data and who's holding that? Like that's scary. That's kind of.
You know what? I really don't know how blood, other if it's DNA or what. Do you mind sharing yours?
Fine.
Okay, so Jordan has an older one and mine is a newer one, just so you can see. Please don't take our number in. Actually, people have done that. So, because actually once upon a time you didn't have a picture. You just had a card. So yeah, so it was easy for
It's
some.
weird how it says even on the paper, like certificate of Indian status.
Yes, right? And it's because they still have the legal document that's called the Indian Act. And we're going to get into that, but I'll show it to you now because this is a copy. This is like a really old one. This has been amended. So every time they amend it, it usually becomes another volume of something. But I'll show you this one. And what I did in the front here was just kind of give you a list of content of the kind of information that you can find in there. It's very legal to interpret what some of those clauses mean, are just, you need the lawyers to help you interpret what some of those means. But this Indian Act, we are the only group within Canada that has such legislation upon us. And it's to tell us how we're to live within Canada. And if we don't abide by those, we can be fined, we could be put in jail. I mean, really, there is penalties if we don't abide by those. Now, but they might not be as strict as they used to be. But when I was growing up, I didn't grow up with any traditional knowledge of like doing any of our ceremonies and things like that. It just still wasn't being done in our communities, because I think the fear was still there. Don't do it because you'll go to jail or something silly like that will happen. So it took, I think, a couple generations to get over that so that we can feel comfortable with bringing back some of that culture. And so a lot of those amendments are in the Indian Acts. Okay, so yeah, it is interesting how they still will use the word Indian though at the government level for all their documents. I don't know why they haven't changed it yet. It's probably because they know they're going to just change it again in 6 months. So nothing, I don't mean to talk bad about the government, but they could learn, they could have some cultural education too, I think. Next page is about the Indian Act, which is going around history.
I just have a quick question. For the slide before.
Yeah.
Would that involve all Indigenous groups? You had mentioned like Métis.
The federal government only recognizes the First Nation.
Right.
They do recognize Métis, but in a different way. There's no Métis Act.
Right.
And there's no Inuit Act.
Okay.
Yeah, it's just the Indian Act. And we've had that since 1867. I think, or 76. I always, a little dyslexic, I always get the last two numbers. Oh, duh. The other thing that I like to do is I wanted to show personally, like to really give a more personal impact of how this Indian Act. So I used me. So you can see how many generations this has affected our families and our communities. And we're even going into more now because I have grandchildren. As far as I know, I don't have any great-grandchildren coming yet, but I could. So we're even actually going into another generation. I don't know how many generations this is going to affect, but it could be 20. And one of the things you may even be asking yourself is, well, why don't you guys just get rid of it if you don't like it? Well, and we thought of that, but it is the only piece of legislation we have to make sure that the government upholds their fiduciary responsibility to us as the First Nation. Without that, I don't know where we would be or what would happen. We'd probably just become little creatures in the
It's
corner.
interesting too, because if you think of residential schools, there's so many people that don't want anything to do with the government, therefore they don't want any status. So like getting the status card is kind of difficult for them.
Yep.
So that kind of, like, that's what you're saying earlier, that not everyone that has status card, everyone that has status card, they're choosing to do that,
Mhm.
to be recognized by the government.
Yeah.
But if they don't, that does not mean they're not Indigenous.
Right.
It just means they don't want anything to do with the government.
Right, that's right. Or they can't prove,
Yeah.
in the paperwork. The other thing, so I get just like, one thing I wanted to say, thank you for bringing that up, Jordan, because the reason that we say that Indian status card doesn't make it 100% legit, because before 1985, there was a ruling, and this was in the Indian Act, that if and I'm going to say Mi'kmaq man married a non-Mi'kmaq woman, she got to be considered a Mi'kmaq woman. And the federal government recognized her and gave her a status card. And I know that for a fact because my mother got that. My mom had married my dad when she was 19. They lived in the States. He brought her here, and then she lived on the reserve all her life, right up until she passed away in 74. And so she carried that status card. So as far as the federal government was concerned, she was a status person, but she wasn't. She was Irish. Red hair, green eyes, right? All the way. She loved it. And so many women were in that category. Then you had someone like myself who married a non-Indigenous man at the age of 18, and they took my card from me because that was, once you married the non-Indigenous man, then you were out, you were excommunicated. So I had to move off the reserve with him, and they took away my status recognition. So for about 10 years, I went without any identity because I really didn't, not that I knew what identity even meant, but I definitely didn't have it within me. Because when I went up to the community to visit, they would tell me, get back off the reserve where I belong because I, defected or whatever. Then I'd be in the non-Indigenous community. They'd say, get back up on the reserve where you belong, right? So I didn't know where I was supposed to be. And then when I had my two daughters, it was an intergenerational effect. So I was unable to pass on to them any kind of identity or cultural connection. I didn't even have community connection by this point either. So then in 1985, the federal government changed that law, made an amendment to the Indian Act based on a couple of women that went right to the Supreme Court and said, look, this is discriminating against women and you need to change this. And so the Supreme Court said, yes, you're right. So they made the federal government change that and make an amendment. So in 1985, women like myself got their status recognition back. Also, my children, my two daughters got status recognition. So then what happened, though, they never took it away from my mother. She still got to keep it. Now, we had a woman that I knew of who was in the same boat as my mother. She married a Mi'kmaq man, and he ended up dying. And when her kids grew up, she ended up just moving off the reserve, right? And so when she got the reserve, she ended up getting another husband, and he's non-Indigenous husband, but she still got to keep that status recognition card all that time, even though she married.
Your kids get a status card?
Well, just sound good for you. So here she's married now to a non-Indigenous man. They have a daughter, and that daughter's now in her 40s. And guess what? she got status recognition. So there you've got two generations of non-Indigenous people carrying a status card that the federal government says they're Indian. Right. So when we're talking about identity, it's one of the biggest challenges I think we faced in our First Nation, the First Nation today. It's to me, it's one of the first biggest social issue that we're dealing with is identity. And I'm sure many of you have already been challenged by it, maybe in the right here on the mountain with a student, you know, even with a faculty colleague, right? Are you really Indigenous? Right. And we're asking that too. Right. We've been asking that for decades. And so we're really seeing that now. We're seeing universities really taking action and we're trying to bring this so that we can really be honing in on that so that it is the Indigenous people. And they don't have to have status card. That's not what we're saying. But we're saying that you need to be connected. You need to prove to us that you are connected. Okay, so that's kind of just going off base there a little bit on that one. So the Indian Act still is very prominent in our communities or across the First Nation. This is just a quick little thing I wanted to show you, a connection for cultural connections, it's called, from a holistic perspective. If you work with Indigenous people who has come from communities or has a community connection, you cannot go into a community with one specific concept in mind. Like, let's say you were all, let's see, what title can we give you? What profession are you? Somebody say a profession.
Biologist.
Okay, so you're going to go into a community and talk to the community about biology and the great things you can do on the reserve in their community. So you're going in with that, you know, vision. So you sit down with the leadership and the elders and community members and you start talking about biology. Well, then all of a sudden, two-eyed seeing is going to come into the picture, right? Because they're going to say, yeah, but what about this and what about that and what about this? So the next thing you know, even though you've gone in with biology, but you're going to be talking about human rights and you're going to be talking about the environment and you're going to be talking about housing. You're going to end up talking about community development. You're going to end up probably talking about, if not every one of those subjects at some point in your conversation. And that's because one thing always affects another and brings in another. Shallon Jodrey, if you're not familiar with her, is a wonderful Mi'kmaq poet and playwright. And her first play, don't ask me what it was called because I can't remember, but it was about the biologist and she would go to her favorite spot just to, she wasn't a biologist, it was a Mi'kmaq woman, would go to her favorite spot in the forest and watch the chimney sweeps, the birds that live down in the chimneys, the old chimneys. And she would watch them go in and out, in and out. If you want to email me, I can tell you the name of it, because it is out in print. You can buy this play. And so this biologist comes in because they're doing a research project and they want to learn how many chimney sweeps are going in and out and all that stuff. So they sit there and they're both doing their thing. He's with his paper and she's just sitting there with her sacred fire. And anyway, they end up getting together and totally having differences on what they're both doing. But by the end of the play, they're both sitting together through the two-eyed seeing and respecting each other's way of doing things. And it's a wonderful play. Might even be able to convince her to do the play again sometime. It's fun to watch. But anyway, that's what this is all about. And it's just teaching that chances are if you go in with a vision, your vision's probably going to grow this big. And my brother always used to like to say to people, he said, I hope you come in with 1 million questions, but I hope you leave with 2 million. So that's kind of how it works. Some of these I have touched on. I'm not going to like these. This is, like I said, a 2-hour presentation all in itself on this historical impact. But we just go quickly through them. The European first Atlantic settlement was in 1605, of course, down in Annapolis Royal. And we had scalping proclamations. There were 2 against the Mi'kmaq. Is there anyone who's never heard tell of this? Just raise your hand. Or have you heard about the scalping proclamations? Is anybody too shy to put your hand up? Everybody knows about them because then I don't have to talk about them too long. But I will say though, those proclamations really played havoc on our population. They were alive and well. Actually, one of them is still on the books. I say that very slowly. I don't want people to know that that's still out there, but so they're still trying to get that off the books as well. So that really impacted. The treaties, that's a specialty workshop all in itself, and this is just some dates. I think there's even other dates for treaties besides what's written there. The Indian Act and the reserves, we kind of talked about that. Residential schools probably doesn't need to focus on too much. We're quite familiar with that. We hope to do a wonderful project too on for the residential school on October 30th to wear Orange Shirt Day. We we're thinking we'd like to kind of do the same kind of installation that we just did with the missing and murdered or something along that line. So stay tuned. Then the First Nation Canadian citizen. This one, I think, was one of the highlights of my learning. And I didn't learn about this till I was in my 30s, that we weren't even recognized as Canadian citizens until 1956. And I'm thinking, oh man, I was born in 1958. That was only 2 years before I was born, and would have been the time of my older brother. So he wasn't even seen as Canadian citizen. And then I think about my father and then my grandmother, and you just go back and back. And I'm like, well, geez, if we lived in, I didn't swear, I promise. We lived in Canada, but we weren't called Canadian citizens. What the heck were we? And then that's when it really tuned in that, oh, we were Indians. And that's why we were never seen as an equal within Canada. So even with 1956, the Canadian citizen, I know the way the government worked, it was in 1948 was when the citizenship, I don't know what you call it, came about. And it was shortly after that, they realized, oh, we forgot the First Nation people. We forgot the Indian people. So in 1956, they went back to the drawing board and added us to that citizenship, whatever that's called. And so that's how we got there. Then in 1960, we were allowed to finally vote in the elections. Yay. That was one of my highlights of my life. No.
Crazy that Indigenous people had to go fight in the war, yet they weren't validated as Canadian citizenship.
There were many things about if you went for a higher level of education, you had to get enfranchised. If you went to war, you had to get enfranchised. Then the worst part about it is our veterans, when they went to war, we were told that they went to war because they saw themselves as a warrior and they were there to help fight for the country. But when war was over and they came back, they were just sent back to the reserves and forgotten. There was no compensation, no consideration from Veterans Affairs. There was nothing. Until later, they did started to provide for housing down the road, housing. And I know my dad was a veteran, and they did start. I remember him getting a pension. I'm going to say he was probably in his late 60s or 70s when he finally started to get a small pension from Veterans Affairs. So they, it took a while, but finally that attention did come to them. Bill C-31, I explained about a little bit there. That no longer applies, by the way, because I ended up marrying another non-Indigenous man, and I didn't lose my status, of course. But here's interesting, because we're still dealing with this identity, right? I told you my two daughters got identity when I got it back. And so therefore, they were able to pass that on to my grandchildren. My son, who's 33, he was born after 1985, so he falls in a different category. So because of the way this works, the government works, any grandchild he gives me won't receive status recognition unless he has it by a lady who has status too. Otherwise, it stops.
It's so crazy to me.
It is. So I'll have grandkids who are recognized and grandkids who aren't. Now you tell me how confusing that's going to be to explain to them why cousins have it. And there is a new one coming out called the Cousins Law. It's not called that, but that's what we call it. And it is because that's what we're seeing. We've got cousins that do and cousins that don't. Yes. And I forgot your question too, dear.
The application of the Indian Act is not applied to Inuit.
Right.
So can you help me understand how that seems extraordinary?
They have a different relationship with the government. The Inuit, yeah, they're not part of the Indian Act, only the First Nation.
No, I assume that they were, so that was interesting.
Yeah, no, the Inuit has their own relationship with government.
I think because they have those land claims, so then they govern their land. But of course, like for Mi'kmaq, of like, and the other First Nations that, I mean, they don't have a claim over, I don't know, whatever.
I don't know I don't know, hopefully nobody thinks this is disrespectful, but when I look at it, I'm thinking, well, when like the land of where we were, when settlers arrived, our government wanted our lands. I don't think they were so, I don't think they were really caring about, about the Arctic. Yeah, but they do have their own relationship, but in a different way. Yeah, okay. And your question, sorry, dear.
Yeah, so this is your driver's license, is it?
So you couldn't see my number? Or what? Do you know how many times I give that out for my status card? Or I give my status card for my driver's license?
This actually looks quite similar to a permanent resident card.
Oh, does it? I say, I don't know what they look like, so, yeah,
I think
interesting.
Yeah.
Maybe that's why they want to change it again, because now it's starting to look like somebody else's card, right? I don't know. We'll see. We'll come back in a couple of years. I'll probably have the new one to show you. Okay, so then, so that's Bill C-31. 60 scoop, that was a big thing in our community. And we're now seeing that today because all those children that were taken to non-foster homes or adopted out or whatever are now adults and are saying, hey, I just found out I have Indigenous ancestry. And so now they're all coming in to try and regain back what was lost and taken from them. Centralization in Nova Scotia, we had two communities, Indian Brook, which I can't pronounce their Mi'kmaq name, can you? I don't know, and Eskasoni, so I just say Indian Brook and Eskasoni. They were the two communities that the government tried to set aside for all the Mi'kmaq people to move to. They didn't like us spread out through Nova Scotia. It made too much work, I guess, for the Indian affairs or Indian agents. So they wanted to kind of herd us into two communities, which is why Eskasoni and Indian Brook are the two largest communities populated, because during the centralization period. Pardon me?
Sibonacity?
Yes, that's it. Yeah, I knew somebody could pronounce it, yes. And so what happened was many of our people did move to one or the other. And you probably can't meet a Mi'kmaq person that doesn't have a relative living in one of those two communities. It is just nearly impossible because many of our people moved. Some decided they didn't want to move, so they took off to Quebec and Maine, particularly Maine, because we did a lot of summer jobbing there with the potato picking and blueberry and all that stuff. So a lot of them went there. And some of them just simply refused to not move. And so those are the ones that we give thanks to. Yes, Sonia.
I have a question.
Oh, okay.
If your son's children do not get status, would that be different had your son's dad been Indigenous?
Yes. Yes. If his dad had been status, then my grandchildren from him would be recognized too, just like my other grandkids. So there's still that little patriarchal thing happening.
How it's based off who you have a kid with.
Yeah, it
Because
is.
I have a sister that lives on reserve. She's Mi'kmaq. She has a status card and everything, but she had a kid with a white guy.
Mhm.
And therefore her kid is not considered Indigenous.
Right. There is that, there is
Even though
that.
they live and they're on reserve.
Yeah. Now, one thing I want to share is, that status card is still important. It really is important. Let's not, we're not going to argue about that because a lot of people do. The first thing you'll get asked, do you have a status card? Right. But the challenge with it is that just because you have the status card doesn't necessarily make you Indigenous, as I said. However, what we need to be doing is coming up with some way that first of all, if my grandchild from my son doesn't have recognition, that don't matter to me. I'm not going to treat them or teach them any less because they don't, right? They're going to learn just as much as my other grandchild.
But as they get older, they're going to suffer from not having access to healthcare,
Right.
like university.
Yeah.
cetera.
Yeah, the accessibility that it can provide you. Not that you, like a lot of people I'll have people come to me and say, oh, I want to get my status card so I can get free housing and free education and free healthcare and I can go fishing and hunting whenever I want. Well, that's what society, or I shouldn't say society, but yeah, I guess it is. That's what society does think, that it's that way. But in reality, it's not that way. To us in reality, those are not just a given. And just because you have a status card doesn't mean that you're going to have access to those things. And it's not that you get free education. You do get a living assistance, or you may get your tuition paid for, but not all students can access that. Depending on, because what happens is an envelope of money goes to a community that says this is for post-secondary education. Well, if you get $100,000 and you've got 100 students wanting that $100,000, think about how much each one's going to get. So it does, hey, hi. So it does affect it in that way. So it's not a given. It's not all our students has access to that. Yes.
I have a question. It may be naive or something, but just to understand, for example, when your mom got married to your dad, and she became Indigenous, does the community, I don't know if that's just for the government marriage certificate and the government recognized her, or does the community have any saying in that?
They don't have a say, because if the government makes that decision, we don't have a say, but it's still whether they'll be accepted or not in the community. That's a big difference. Most of these women were accepted though, because they were the spouse of the Mi'kmaq man. So yeah, or vice versa.
But it's not that there's.
Not always though, not like years ago when I was a kid growing up, it was challenging. Like I can remember, they're not being accepted.
To the status, right? If they are not recognized by the community, still they would have the status because it's a legal thing.
Yeah.
Okay.
They would see, even though they might not have been accepted in the community, but because the government gave them that recognition, they could live anywhere in Canada and still maintain that recognition. Okay, so then, so that was centralization, and then the off and on reserve, well, we kind of talked about that, and that still applies today. Many of us that live off reserve, we don't have equal access to those that live on reserve. We don't have that equal access to programs and service delivery. Okay, truth and reconciliation. I just wanted to quickly talk a little bit about this, is that where we are today with TRC. Okay, we know the truths, and unfortunately the truths are still coming. Not happy to hear that, and the more I hear, the worse I tremble, but we are. We know we have the 94 recommendations, and to date, and don't quote me on this, but I think someone told me the last recommendations we're up to by government is 8 out of these 94. Yeah, out of the 9, something like that, something ridiculous. I think it was under 10 that's been addressed yet. So we still got a long ways to go. And that now, instead of saying reconciliation, we're now saying reconciliation. It's like, now let's do some action. Let's put some of this stuff into play. And that's where we are now too with government. Okay. These are just a couple of things I wanted to bring to your attention about the uniqueness. The First Nation is the First Nation of this nation of Canada. But we're not necessarily respected as the First Nation. And when we look at just the time period, we've been here for over 13,000 years versus 400 years or 500 years, but yet we're still not treated as the First Nation people. And furthermore, we say First Nations, like to me, it's just become a word now. But when we stop and put the in front of it, it becomes a whole different meaning. It's the First Nation. And I say this respectfully, I don't mean to make anybody feel bad, but if we're the First Nation who've been here for 13,000 years, what does that make everybody else? If we're the First Nation, what would be their title? The second nation, right? But we don't say that, right? We don't say that. However, when you listen to government though, they say they will sit at the table and talk nation to nation. So they identify that we're both nation, that we're the First Nation and they're a nation too, but they just don't say, this is the First Nation and we're the second nation. They just don't say that. But can you imagine if we did start saying that? Like it becomes a whole different mindset when we start doing
You
that.
see what's happening in Alberta right now? They're trying to talk about separating themselves from Canada. So all the chiefs there are stepping up and saying, like, you're not welcome here, basically, because you're acting like you own this land and they not own that land because it's treaty land. So now there's this huge uproar. It's just interesting to see this happen.
Yeah, I know there is that confusion too about when we talk about lands. People think, oh, you know, what, especially Mi'kmaq, we're here in Mi'kmaq, they're like, oh my goodness, what if they want Halifax back? Or what if they want, and that's not what it means that we want our lands back. What we want is to be treated in a way that we can be self-sufficient and self-governing and be able to look after ourselves, because we do know that our nation does have a different way of looking at life and the way of dealing with things, even though we're highly influenced by the last 400 years. There's no denying that we're influenced, but we've still maintained many of our traditional teachings. That's why we now are looking at two-eyed seeing, because they're now bringing that to the table. So we do have, like I said, we still have a long ways to go, but we're getting there. And again, kind of getting back to that cultural connections, there's no one-way approach to dealing with the First Nation. Every community and every person is unique, and you will find that with your Indigenous students. You would find that with your Indigenous colleagues, that everyone is different. What you help with one doesn't mean you can do the same thing with the other, because everybody's at different levels. Okay, next one. This I just want you to think about. It's on your thing that you get to take home with you. But I want you to just take a second. I think we got a couple minutes we can do this. I want you to just take a couple seconds and answer these questions to yourself as I say them. Think about a time in your life, and it doesn't matter whether you were this little or you're this little. Think about a time when something was taken from you. Maybe it was your doll, your truck, your family member. It doesn't matter. It could be anything, whatever jumps out at you. When you got that, think about why was it taken from you? How did it make you feel when that was taken from you? What was your reaction to having that thing taken from you or person? Does it still impact you today? Does it affect other family generations? For us as the First Nation, that's our lives. This is how it is for us. We are constantly reminded of the things that has been taken from us and how that made us feel. And we all deal with it in different ways. And does it still impact us? Absolutely. Is it having intergenerational effects? Absolutely. And that's what we're seeing today, are those intergenerational effects. But I just like to share that, because when you can make it personal, it can help you to understand a little bit more of the plight of the First Nation. And then when you do think about, this is really great group discussions that you could have in a meeting or something, is think about what things were lost to the First Nation, just as individuals, families, communities over the last 500 years. What would have been some of those things lost? What would have been their reactions? And then what would have been those intergenerational effects? And are we still seeing them today? 500 years later, we're still seeing them. So these are really great group discussions to have. That's it. Well, you. And please come over to the center at any time. Drop by, have tea. Kayla Bernard is our new Indigenous student advisor, and she has a trained dog. She's lovely. I share this because I'm paranoid of dogs. I have had it for over 48 years, and this dog has changed my life. Really has. It's just, I'm like, I can't believe I'm standing next to this dog without fear. So, yeah, so she's very gentle, lovely, but please come over and visit anytime. We'd love to have you. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Theresa. So again, as part of our efforts at MSVU and in the research office in particular to address reconciliation, I would gently suggest that you have a look at our research strategic plan. And if you're looking at this, please check out pages 18 and 19. I just want to read one reconciliation for all of us to contemplate. So reconciliation requires sustained public education and dialogue, including youth engagement about the history and legacy of residential schools, treaties, and Indigenous rights, as well as the historical and contemporary contributions of Indigenous peoples to Canadian society. So please do have a look at how important truth and reconciliation is, not just something to talk about, but something to actually do. That is available to you online. And again, we are so grateful to you, Theresa, for being here. Theresa is on campus, so if you've got other questions you want to follow up, you can just find her over there. And please do email her, and I'm sure she'll be happy to answer any other questions that you have. Yeah, thank you so much.
Thank you. Great. Thank you.